Let's try that again. Okay. All right. So, can anyone tell me if you're hearing me? I guess that's the question. Um, hmm. I'm counting on someone to let me know that they're in the session and that they're seeing it. Let me let me reach out and see if anyone's listening. Always tough to hear on these because or to know on these because there's no direct feedback like an open session. Let's see. Oh, good typos. Let's see. All right. Well, I hope everyone had a good holiday season. That you're, at least reasonably ready to get back to things here. I'm kind of, easing back into it. I guess I didn't completely unplug over the holidays. I actually did some finish up editing, some polishing and stuff on my book and code. But yeah, I mean, it was a nice break, a sort of break, and I'm easing back into things. I mean, again, never really completely set things down, but that makes the keeps the momentum going. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, I guess everything looks right. So I'm going to go ahead and launch in, and we'll assume everything is good. Let's see. Okay, so yeah. The link, the link should be in the email that was, or sorry, the tweet. This is what I get for thinking, tweeting, reading. Let's see. So yeah, if we go back to the original, yeah, there we go. It's in the Spring Central tweet, and let's see if it was in the other tweet from Tanzu. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. VMware Tanzu. Yeah, it looks like the same link, maybe. Double checking that. Yes, watch on Twitch. It is. It goes right to it. Perfect. Okay, which I guess I'm telling you that, and if you're hearing this and seeing this, you're already there. So it's in the original tweet. There we go. I have a super helpful, I started to say collaborator, cohort in crime. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're good. I have confirmation. So we'll roll on. All right. So anyway, thanks for coming today. Thanks for tuning in. I know that it is kind of hard to get back into the swing of things. And let's face it, when you're in the swing of things, a lot of the have-tos are catching up on all the stuff that may have piled up maybe a little bit much, although depending on your circumstances, that may be exactly the words over the holidays. But yeah, so thanks for taking the time out to be with me here today. If you are tuning in later, thanks for joining in. This looks really official with the slides here. It isn't really. Let me go ahead and kick that off. I did a Spring into Kotlin talk some time back, a couple of years ago, and I've actually gotten requests since to do it again because it was kind of a nice primer or primer, depending on your preference, to kind of see how to integrate Kotlin into your Spring Boot world, into your Spring Boot application / development cycle. And I do actually, I do have another talk that I give on this that I've as I am wont to do, I've gutted and I'm going to be rebuilding to make it a little bit more of a tips and tricks and deep dive. But this is not that talk. This is the kind of the introductory talk. So if you're here to, if you're already using Kotlin with Spring Boot, this is probably not the talk for you, not the session for you, because this is just kind of a gentle introduction as well as kind of a, I like to kind of, since we've been in this lovely pandemic and situation with things being a bit on their head from what we were used to, I've kind of broken my talks into a couple of different categories, at least going forward for a short time. One is the Bob Ross type of talks, which are the gentle introduction, the, hey, let's get started. This is a, completely non-threatening. It's just a gentle on-ramp into a technology or into a particular thing. And the other is more of a deep dive, more of a let's roll up the sleeves and really dive into this and start kind of turning levers and see what happens and show how you can dive in and really do crazy stuff. This is not the crazy stuff. This is the kind of the Bob Rossian type of thing. So if you're here to kind of get some exposure to it, this is great. This is probably the talk you'll be interested in, at least for starters. If you're already well past that, that's perfectly fine. Check in with me later. I'll be coming back on Twitch Code here in I don't know, a few weeks or a month or so, or a couple months, and doing the other one, the more in-depth wrench turning one. But if you're here and want to stick around, that's great. I came up with this talk again to kind of ease people into using Kotlin with Spring Boot, because ever since, I guess, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I've got this kind of, again, it's not official, but I have a slide that kind of has my talking points that I want to make sure I cover. So I'll wait on the why here for that. But anyway, for those of you who may not know me, my name is Mark Heckler. I am a principal technologist / Spring developer advocate. So I'm a developer and advocate with VMware. I do write code. I do commit code. I do talk about code. So I get to do all the stuff I love. And here are my coordinates. The best ways to reach me are, ways to reach me are via email. The best way to reach me is on Twitter. So if you heard about this on Twitter, you know that. I kind of live on Twitter. But if you are not on Twitter, or if you just haven't connected with me on Twitter, please do. That's where that's kind of where I live. That's kind of where I post pretty much everything. Updates on things that I find interesting, tech and otherwise, but primarily tech, let's face it. So yeah, check me out, MK Heck. Okay. A little bit about me. I have co-authored a couple of books, and I actually fully solo authored a book, which I'll mention here or expound on a bit more here momentarily, just coming out next month. So that's kind of cool. I am an architect and developer by trade. I am also a Java champion, Java 1 rockstar, a Groundbreaker ambassador, a Google developer expert in Kotlin. And again, we're not going to be pressing against the edges, but yeah, it's kind of nice to be recognized for that kind of stuff. That's cool. It still results in me brewing and buying my own coffee. So I will say, if you have your own coffee, drink them if you got them. If not, why not? I mean, really, there should be something good about, being, quarantined and locked down and stuff like that. And it should be good coffee. That should be primary among them. So again, I'm a Spring developer and advocate. I also am the sole creator and curator of Spring Noticias en Español. Si eres hispanohablante, déjame extender tu voz. If you are a Spanish speaker or have Spanish language resources, let me help amplify your voice. Let me help get the word out and build the community. If the more we all learn, the more we all grow, right? And that was an area I felt I could help out with. I speak Spanish poorly, even worse than my English, but it was an area I felt I could contribute to and help in. So that's what I do. And if you're not a Spanish speaker, that's fine too. That's just my thing, right? I'm also a pilot. I am a licensed pilot here in the U.S., which is cool. It's amazing the trust that a government agency will imbue you with if you pass multiple written and oral exams and a flight test and do all kinds of study. And anyway, it's cool. It's fun. I enjoy it. So, and that's the only kind of flying I'm doing the last almost year. So that's also kind of cool. New book. I mentioned this. It's technically still in early access, but the official release is only, it's less than a month away now. So weeks, just 3 weeks maybe? And then the official release, the official version is out. I am wrapping up the code repos now. I've had a couple people ask, hey, I can't find them on O'Reilly's site. They're not there on O'Reilly's site yet. I haven't even been given the link to post them, but they will be. They will be by the time the book goes live, officially live. So yeah, it's I swore I'd never write a book solo, and then of course I did, and this is just me. So yeah, it's been a fun and wild ride, and hopefully you'll like it and get something out of it. If you want to read the early release version, you're welcome to follow the link on the screen and go check it out. And that gives you, I think, a week or two to check things out. And by then, of course, the official version will be out. The version, the early access, is unedited. There are a couple of things that we found that somehow got mixed up in versioning. So there are a couple little examples that are a little squirrely, but other than that, I think it's pretty much intact. So yeah, if you're interested, check it out. So I like to point to this because this is one of the interesting comments that has been made for years among folks who just are a little ooked out by the amount of things that Spring does for you. And I say Spring generally, whether it's Spring Framework, Spring Boot, Spring Data, et cetera, et cetera. So because the Spring name, the Spring umbrella is quite large and encompassing, right? So you can use Spring Security and not be using Spring Data, or you can use Spring Data and not be using Spring Cloud Function or whatever. I mean, there are a lot of different things that bear the name Spring. All of them, though, all of them have certain things that make your life a lot easier, right? So auto configuration and opinions. So many times especially if we come from a deep Java background, we get used to doing a lot of things by hand. And the first time or two you do that, it seems really, really cumbersome. About the 100th or 150th time you do that, you're kind of numb to it. So you don't really even notice many times all the boilerplate that you're creating, all the things that you're doing just to kind of set the table so you can actually do the one thing you needed to do, or the 3 or 4 things you needed to do. And the Spring team has for years now been very focused on seeing those patterns, finding those patterns, and saying, look, if 98% of the time, and there isn't a hard number, but if the overwhelming number of times that this is done the same way, if that dominates all of the times that something is done, why don't we make that part of an auto configuration where your framework, your technology stack kind of takes that into account and says, look, I'm going to make this the default. And if you need to tweak this or override it, it'll be simple to do. But if 80 to 90 or 98% of the time, whatever it is, you do things the exact same way, why don't we make that easy for you? Why don't we take that off of the creating 3 pages of boilerplate code and make that a single annotation, or whatever the case may be? And that is when you come to any of the Spring projects, a lot of times that's the one concern I hear is, oh my gosh, there's so much magic. Well, that's why I love this quote. Arthur C. Clarke once said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that's the secret, right? It isn't magic. It's technology. It's logic applied to repetitive problems. So that's kind of what Spring does. It takes certain opinions, and these aren't taken lightly. They're actually made very decisively and deliberately based on years and volumes of experience across the industry. And that's kind of a natural lead into this, right? So today's kind of chat, and I hate to even call it a talk because this is very informal. I know I've got a few slides here, a handful of slides, but I mean, this is kind of to keep me on focus and make sure I don't blithely skip over anything. But why? I guess we're kind of past the why Spring Boot, right? But I mean, why Kotlin with Spring Boot? And what I want to do is try to answer those whys. Why switch from Java? I mean, Java is a great language and a great ecosystem, and it's been around a long time. It's got a lot of strong capabilities, a lot of depth. It's got a lot of breadth too, with the number of libraries available. What do we gain from considering another language? Is it worth it? I mean, I struggled with this for a few years. I mean, Kotlin has been around quite a while. And I guess before I get into the code and stuff, I do want to cover a little bit of that. Because many times folks hear of Kotlin and it just feels like Kotlin has kind of come out of nowhere, right? It kind of took the world by storm recently. It's become a thing very recently. But it's not really very recently. It's just that, as with most things, it takes a while to kind of get traction, to get visibility. Kotlin has been around for, I want to say 10 or 11 years now. So it's been around a while. JetBrains has been, very studiously creating and using it behind the scenes, as well as, of course, Google standardized on it for Android development a couple of years ago. I think it was 3 years ago. They said, hey, it's an option. And a couple of years ago, they said, this is our preference. And at some point, it's probably going to be the only option for developing Android apps. I don't know, but that's my expectation. And of course, Kotlin is kind of a... I don't want to say a successor, but it's certainly kind of the way forward. It incorporates a lot of good things that people have associated in the past with Groovy, with Scala, with Java, and there's a very much a forward-looking approach to developing Kotlin, the language, Kotlin, the ecosystem as well. So it gives you a lot of capabilities. It's concise, and Java is often criticized for being verbose. I've never had a problem with Java's verbosity. And I'll say that right out because I think, as they say, your compiler reads your code once. You read your code all the time, frequently, daily. And if something is verbose but clear, that's great. That's fine. That's what we need, right? However, comma, if there's a way to say the same thing clearly with much less code, that would seem to be a win too. And Kotlin gives you that capability, as we'll see here today. Kotlin interoperates extremely well with Java. There have been, for those of you who have a Scala background, you probably recognized fairly early on that Scala and Java interoperability was, let's just say, a bit problematic, right? And typically what people did is they either walled off in the Java camp or they went entirely all in on Scala. Kotlin gives you the ability to have a lot of the great things that Scala presented and presents, but do so in a very, very interoperable way with Java. And I'll show you that as we go along too, because I think that's a huge, I started to say selling point, but it's not for sale. Kotlin is available to all of us. But it gives you a lot of power and flexibility to not have to eat the elephant in one bite, which is huge, I think. Let's see. So is it worth it? I don't want to belabor points because I'll be mentioning a lot of these things or alluding to them as we go through the code. Is it worth it? I think so. I personally think so. But again, I struggled with this too because the amount of time you spend investing into a new language, you could be investing into deepening or broadening your language of the primary language you use, which is Java. But the thing about it is Kotlin is so complementary to Java that I think it actually helps you far more than it diverts any attention. It actually gives you more tools in your tool belt without actually weakening your hold on Java, so to speak. And I will mention the one thing that trips me up the worst when I switch between them, and it's I think that in itself is a testament to how well the two languages fit together and in your mind as well as in your IDE. Quick victories, we'll cover those, and we'll lay the groundwork for some longer term gains as we go. And with that, I'm just going to launch into the code, pardon me, because I think, again, this is where you really see things. It's where I see things anyway. It's where it kind of all comes together and makes sense to me or doesn't, and I walk away crying. But we'll go with that. So let's see, we'll stop with that. I'll pop up this. All right, still going. All right. So I, in trying to figure out the best way to introduce Kotlin within the Spring ecosystem to folks, I kind of came up. I like to simplify things down to the absolute, distill them to the smallest thing possible, to the simplest thing possible, and then build out from there. Because I think, again, this is how I learn best. I hope there are at least a few of you out there who are like me. If not, hopefully it kind of makes sense enough you can grab onto it as well. But yeah, what I want to do is kind of cover a few different things, and I'll point out when I take a different fork in the road, if you will, as I go. But many times, it would be wonderful. I guess let me back up by saying it would be wonderful if our boss came to us and said, "Hey, look, I have this brand new project, nothing encumbering any kind of technology decisions that you might want to make. It's all greenfield. You just choose everything. You can choose the entire stack, the platform, everything. It's all you." And that would be wonderful. However, that almost never happens, right? So many times we are looking and we work with, the predominant amount of stuff that we work with are brownfield applications, things that are well established, that are proven, that are tried, that are in production, that are operating on a daily basis, and that we depend on. So I kind of took this approach that, look, it would be really nice to see how we would migrate or work with an existing Java-based Spring Boot application and then turn it into a Kotlin application. I also wanted to show you how easy it is to kind of flip that switch between the two because, again, they're not mutually exclusive, which I think is one of the huge factors in Kotlin's adoption and the in addition to so many good language features, one of the things that makes people love Kotlin so much. So I do want to, what I'm going to do is kind of a little bit of both. I'm going to show you, hey, let's create a Kotlin project, and then I'm going to flip it to Java, and then I'm going to create a Java project, and I'll flip it to Kotlin, or migrate it to Kotlin, I guess. So you'll see a little bit of several different thought threads here going on, but I think hopefully they'll all kind of weave together at the end. I do want to say that, why Kotlin, I guess, is another part that I kind of missed. As of, I think it was late 2017, Kotlin became a full first-class citizen in the Spring ecosystem. And that was not a decision made lightly because obviously the majority of Spring and Spring Boot applications are developed using Java. It's a great language. It's a great ecosystem. But Kotlin is something that gives a lot of flexibility, power, control, conciseness. So it gives a lot of things as well. And of course, we've supported Groovy in the past. Kotlin is on, well, way past ascending at this point. But Kotlin is well regarded, well received, and we wanted to be able to support that in the community as well. And again, very complementary to Java. So as of 2017 and the first part of 2018 for Spring Boot, 2017 with Spring Framework, Kotlin has been on pretty even footing really with Java. I mean, Spring Framework is still developed in Java, but it's fully interoperable. We do have some DSLs for Kotlin specifically. Because Kotlin lends itself really well to those, more so than Java, but we've tried to be judicious about that because what we don't want to do is create this entirely new language based on a language which is like no other use of that language anywhere else, a la Scala, which happened a lot with the fracturing of the communities and DSLs. Anyway, so I'm digressing, but pardon me. Okay, so the Spring Initializer is where I will start. This just makes it easier to create a Spring Boot-based application. If you're not familiar with the Spring Initializer, get familiar with it. It makes your life, again, that much simpler. You can go with light mode or dark mode, which, whew, that's blinding. Whew, that's much better. Okay. But yeah, this is how you can create a Spring Boot project, right? So it allows you to generate your project. It doesn't generate code other than your main application class and main method. But it does give you the ability to choose your dependencies and kind of get off to a running start, set up your project structure. You can choose to use Maven or Gradle. I'm feeling the hipster, so I'm going to go with Gradle today. And Kotlin, of course, today, because I wanted to create this as a Kotlin project. Again, the differerences are, of course, if you have a Java project, you can do Gradle or Maven, and Gradle comes out with a Groovy-based Gradle build.gradle. If you choose Kotlin and Gradle, then it comes out with a Kotlin script build.gradle.kts, which is a nice touch. It's not absolutely essential. Obviously, you can still use a Groovy-based build.gradle file, but it is a nice touch that we kind of factor in and we include just as a nice little extra. I'm going to create the project metadata, the hecklers.com for my group. We'll create this. I'm going to call this my K-Cup, because Kotlin cup, and it's going to be coffee based. Anyway, okay, so work with me here. All right, so this will be our Kotlin K-Cup demo project. All right, and I'm going to use jar packaging because who uses wars? Well, we certainly don't. Stick with Java 11, and again, that's fine. I'm going to be using Kotlin for most of it, but for the Java stuff that I do, I'll throw in some. Just use Java 11 for my JDK. Okay, so I'm just going to again keep it fairly simple. I'm going to bring in my web dependency to build a web API, and then I also want to bring in Mongo, and again this. Use anything you want. This is just an example that I want to do because I want to have some database access and build an API. Again, very simple, but I want to kind of hit on all the aspects. I'm going to bring in Spring Data MongoDB, and I'm also going to bring in the embedded MongoDB database, just because that makes it kind of neat and self-contained for my application. One other thing that I do want to show you, if you have not seen this yet with the Spring Initializer, is, oops, I just skipped ahead. I like the Explorer. And this allows you to, check out your project as it's being generated, before you actually generate it, download it, unzip it, and all that. So it lets you see kind of the structure and everything else here. Here's your build.gradle.kts, your build file. So it shows you the things that are in there. It gives you a chance to kind of sanity check it before you pull it down and start working with it and go, oops, forgot 3 dependencies or whatever. So, so I'm going to go ahead and generate that, and we'll save that to my desktop. And I've got some stuff out there already, so we'll just drop that, unzip that, and we'll open that in our favorite IDE, NetBeans. Kidding. Nothing wrong with NetBeans. I don't want any NetBeans lovers to start throwing things at their screen. I pick on my friends, but I typically use IntelliJ because, again, with Kotlin, the same folks who created IntelliJ and maintain IntelliJ are JetBrains. The same folks who are behind and driving forward Kotlin as a language our JetBrains. So, as you might imagine, the support is quite good in IntelliJ for Kotlin, as well as they're the folks who created who do the Android development environment as well, which is based on IntelliJ. So, all right. So it looks like we're there. So I'm going to, I promised one thing. I'm going to start here at the build.gradle file or .kts file. And let me just give you a quick tour of this, not to belabor the point, but we can see here we've got the Kotlin version, the Kotlin plugin version. Let's see, so on and so forth. Let's get down to here. I do want to point out a couple of things. Let's see. And I'm looking. Okay. Oh, yeah, here we go. Sorry, I'm just looking right past it. So right now we've got our embedded Mongo database set up just for test. I want to actually use this. So I'm just going to change that to implementation so we can use this not just for our tests, but for full implementations, which, yeah, oh well. I do want to also point out a couple of things here. The compiler args, we've got JSR 305 type of annotations that are supported, and what that basically means is that within the Spring code base, what we've done is indicate for our return types and parameter types and variable types whether they can be null or not, right? So that's important because Kotlin has null safety. You have to specifically state that a variable can be null, can have a null value or no value, in order for that to even be possible. Because in Kotlin, if you have a string, it is a string. There is no question if it's null or if it's a string. It is a string unless you specifically state, nope, this is a string variable that could possibly not be a string. It could possibly be a null. And so that's very important. The 305, JSR 305 style annotations are one way that you can do that, and that's the way that we have embraced within the Spring Codebase. The JVM target of 11 is important because by default, Kotlin targets 6. Now, why? Why Java 6? That is ancient, right? Well, Android is still based on Java 6. So the fact that we're on server side, we're not limited by that, but of course, that would be the case if you were developing an Android application. So that kind of covers the key bits here, and that's fine. So let's see. So yeah, Kotlin Spring plugin. So that gets us things because I guess just to point out one other thing before I go on to the next step and forget that, in Java, classes are open by default, so they can be extended unless you specifically make them final. In Kotlin, it's just the opposite, so it's closed by default. But in certain frameworks, especially Java frameworks, you'll have just the opposite case. So in order to work and interoperate smoothly with that, with things like Spring Framework or other frameworks, you have to be able to declare or annotate these classes, or indicate these classes are being open, I should say, indicate, not annotate. And with the Spring plugin, what it does is it takes the Kotlin all open plugin and basically extends that to automatically say, hey, look, anything that's in the Spring framework annotated with @component or @async or @transactional, a couple others that just escape me off the top of my head, but it opens those by default for you, so you don't have to go around and indicate all these classes are open. So that's kind of a nice little extra thing. So let's go to our application class, main application class. Now, I mentioned earlier that it's very easy to switch between. Come on. Nope, it didn't do it. Oh well, keystrokes, key shortcuts. It's very easy to switch between Java and Kotlin. So right now, what I did is I create a Kotlin project, and you can see that this is a Kotlin file. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. You can see that this kcup application.kt, it's a KT, the .kt file, so it's a Kotlin file. And IntelliJ rightly sees this as a Kotlin file, right? So let's fix things up just a little bit here. I'm going to, before I do that, what I like to recommend you do when you're starting out with this kind of thing, as well as carrying on through, is that, as you can see from the structure here, you've got a source main Kotlin, just like you had source main Java, and then your package class names, things like that, classes. What I really like to recommend you do is to create, let's see, come on. Boom, boom. So I recommend you create a a parallel set of directories here, or parallel set of packaging and directories to the Kotlin one, just like this, right? So you have a corresponding Java and Kotlin configuration, if you will. So sort of like source main and source test, right? So we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go ahead and create now. Well, actually, I'm just going to cheat just a little bit and copy that. And then we'll do this, and we'll create our new package. So yeah, so now we have exact parallels. And why is this important? Well, I like to do this because it keeps my code more organized. You don't have to do this. There's no hard and fast requirement, but in my house there is. So here we go. All right, so now I'm going to, just for fun, I'm going to change this from a Kotlin file to a Java file. Now immediately, IntelliJ complains. You know, this is Kotlin, right? There are rules here. This isn't groovy. You know, we have certain rules that we need to abide by, and we're not abiding by them. So we took this cake-up application file that was Kotlin, we made it a Java file. Now I'm going to drag it up here, just move it, because again, I think that's a good habit to get into, keeping things in the right bins. And let's change this over. Let's convert this, right? So I'm going to just blow that away, and I'm going to do my public static void main, and we'll do a spring application.run, and we'll take our class, which is our kcop application.class, and we'll pass in our args, and we can see here we've got to do a little bit of cleanup. Oops, wrong keystroke. I'm trying to look around my mic at my keys when I do that occasionally, and sometimes I miss a key. And we need to add our semicolons, because in Kotlin they're not required. And that's the big trip up right there, which tells you how easy it will become for you, if you're not already in that habit, to switch between Java and Kotlin. The big hang up for me is just losing track of whether I need to add the semicolons or not. So it truly is that complementary, right? If that's the biggest problem, that's a pretty small problem. All right, so I've made this now a Java file, a Java application. Let's run it. Let's see if it works. And that gives me a chance to drink some coffee. So win-win. Look, it works. Now, it doesn't do anything at this point other than, you know, fire up Mongo and, you know, embedded Mongo and everything's happy, but it does work, which gives you a pretty good indication how easy it is to switch between the two, right? So now we have our main application class. Let's go ahead and do some stuff here. So I'm going to, let's go ahead and create a new Java class. I'm going to, again, be talking about coffee today because just feeling it here. Okay, so we're going to make this at document, and we'll make our at ID field here, and our ID will be a string ID, and of course we'll have our private string type and code, right? So what I'm going to do, Kofe, yeah. What I'm going to do is create a coffee domain class here. These are my three fields. What I do want to do is create a constructor that just includes the type, because code, what I want to do is derive that from the type. I want to kind of slugify this, make it into a code that represents the type of coffee we're talking about. And ID is going to be assigned automatically by Mongo, so I don't need to worry about that either. So this is my constructor, right? And of course I want my getters and setters. So we'll just do this. Now I don't want to be able to set the ID, right? So I'm just going to make this private for the time being. And I'm going to do a few things that are a bit shortcutty. Is that a word? Anyway, a bit of a shortcut. So it's not always the best of engineering rigor and discipline, but I do this kind of so I can show you some things that I want to get to. So if you'll bear with me on some of the points that aren't maybe something you'd put in your final code base, that's perfectly fine. I accept that. So with the code, I actually do want to be able to set the code. I'm actually going to change this though, because we're deriving our code from the type. So we're going to say our type, and we're going to do a to lowercase. So we'll take any type that we pass in. I'm going to replace all spaces with a dash, and that will be fine for the time being, because again, our code is going to be a derived member variable. So this dot code equals, actually no, we'll just do a set code, and we'll pass in the type. Nice. Okay, again, not blindingly elegant, but it works. I'm going to go ahead also and do my equals and hash codes. And that's fine. And then let's go ahead and do our toString Boom. Okay, so now we have a domain class. So this is probably not unlike something you would see in your own code. Again, it's fairly concise. It's only got 3 member variables. So, you're talking a fairly small domain class, but yet we still have quite a bit of code here to look at, and that's fine. It's a bit verbose, but it is fine. The next thing we want to do though is go ahead and get back over here, and we will create our repository. So I want to be able to persist these coffees in our coffee repository. This will be an interface that I'm defining, and I'm going to extend our CRUD repository interface defined in Spring Data. We're going to be storing objects of type coffee with IDs of type string. Now, the nice thing about Spring Boot's auto configuration, or a nice thing about Spring Boot's auto configuration when it comes to Spring Data, is that again, the opinions, it saves you a ton of time. So rather than setting up any entity managers based on Entity Manager Factory and opening and closing and things like that, if you define an interface that extends a Spring Data interface in your application, and you have a database driver on your class path, which we can see, it's right here, right? So right here, we're actually talking about dealing with Mongo. We've got our Spring Boot starter for data here for MongoDB. So this is enough for Spring Boot to say, look, you're extending a Spring Data interface. You're actually, you have a database driver on your class path. I bet you want to talk to a database. Now that's not magic, right? This is very logical. And that's what we're doing here. We're actually extending that Spring Data interface. Now, this is enough. This gives you a certain amount of things like, find one, find all, delete one, delete all, things of that nature, count. So it gives you certain capabilities that every data store you would want to have from every data store that you would probably ever create. But if you need to extend that in some way, if you need to add capabilities, it's certainly easy to do by convention or directly via specifying queries, hand-tuned queries, if you will. But by convention, it's very simple to do as well. So what I'm going to do with this is just let's see, we'll create an optional. We want to return an optional of coffee. Come on. There we go. Happy. All right. And I'm going to find coffee by the code, and I'm going to pass in a code to do that, right? So this is enough to specify a particular method and the parameter and the return type for Spring Data for a method to be created on your behalf. Now, again, if you need to do something fancy, of course, you can do an @query and things like that. But this is enough for what we want. We just want to find a particular coffee by the code that it's known by. Okay, so that gives us enough for that. Next, I want to go ahead and create our API. So let's do this. We'll call it our coffee controller. And this will be a REST controller and request mapping. And we'll start off with a coffees endpoint for our default query. So that's good. Now, what are some things we want to do? We want to retrieve all of them, right? So an iterable of coffees, right? So an iterable of coffee, get all coffees. And of course, we need to, in order to do that, we need to inject our coffee repository. We'll call that repo. How do we do that? Well, we'll add a constructor parameter and do constructor injection. We can do field injection. We can auto-wire it directly. That's not the best of ideas for numerous reasons, which we can talk about later. We can also, well, I use Lombok frequently for my things and for my demos, and Lombok allows you to do basically the same thing just by doing an add-all-args constructor. But this works fine for us now. So we'll do the constructor injection and create a constructor. And to return all coffees, we just do a return repo and we do a find all. And these are some of the things I was mentioning. But by default, of course, we added the find coffee by code method, but by default, out of the gate, repository support provided by Spring Data gets you things like find all by ID, equals #code toString, delete all, delete, save all, save, count, etc. So let's find all. And that gets us part of our API. Let's go ahead and look up, provide the ability to look up a coffee by its ID, and this will return an optional of coffee, right? Find, we'll do a get coffee, keep it consistent by ID, and we'll use a path variable, string ID, return repo dot find coffee, no, find by ID, right? Nice. All right. So let's say we want to also do a search. All right. And we want to return an optional of coffee. Why not, right? So search for coffee. Sounds like a sad title, right? So request parameter. And we want to make this a non-required parameter by default. And that gives us the ability to do some hopefully some good things, right? So string code. All right. Now, so we'll return repo.find coffee by code. And that works assuming that they've provided the code, right? But what if there is no code? What if they didn't provide that? So outside of that happy path, if you will, so if code equals null. So what happens if it's null? Well, we know what happens if it's not null, right? So we'll go with that. And then if it's null, we need to do something. So I'm going to go with the principle of least astonishment, as is usually a good thing to do. And we'll just do a repo.find all. I'm going to do a, grab an iterator, and we'll do a next. We'll just grab the first one. Now, what you may want to do, and let me come back to the red line in a moment. What you may want to do is something like a house, the house coffee or something, the house blend or what have you. I'm just going to go with the first coffee that happens to be in the data store, which is fine. But as you can see, this is not returning an optional, right? It's returning a coffee. So I'm just going to make this optional.of, and we'll just do that way. All right, so that should be sufficient. But what we now need to do is create some sample data, because at this point we have no coffees. We're talking about coffee a lot, which is really, I guess, a good thing, but without any coffee to discuss, that's kind of sad. So I'm going to go to my application, and I'm just going to create some sample coffees here. So I'm going to create a bean, can't even type now, command line runner bean. Command line runner. There we go. Keep up here. And we'll call this our demo data method, and we'll inject our coffee repository, repo, and command line runner, if you look at it here, is a functional interface with a single abstract method. And since Java 8, what have you been able to do with a functional interface with a single abstract method? We provide a Lambda for that, right? So let's see, return args, and here we go, off to the races. So I'm going to take my repo and I'm going to add some sample data to that. And how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to create some sample data first. So arrays as list and just some sample coffee. And this is usually, pardon me, where I ask people, hey, give me your samples, your favorites that you might like to include. Since I have a kind of a one-way feed going here with Twitch, sadly, I'm going to just throw in some that I really, really like. So let's see. So Caldi Coffee 700. That's a really good one. That's a local blend and roast here in St. Louis, from the central U.S. So that's a good one. Let's see. Here's one that I've recently tried. So Clatch Dark Roast, also delightful. Espresso roast. So when I get to Starbucks, I usually ask for the espresso roast. That's my absolute favorite that they offer. Several others that are, they're okay. Espresso roast, delightful. And let's see what else. So SK Coffee, that's also good. And we'll stop there. That's enough just to get things rolling. So I'm going to convert that to a string, and then I'm going to map each one of those elements. So this is a coffee type, right? So I'm going to do a new coffee. We'll pass that in. And then I'm going to do a for each, and we'll just do a coffee, and we'll do a repo.save of coffee. Now we can simplify this, and it's even helpfully telling me that we can replace these lambdas with method references. Not terrible, right? So that gets us hopefully up and running with a fairly simple Java application that it exposes an external API, it has database storage, and we'll see what we come up with. Oh, well, I did forget to do a couple of things that I really particularly like to do. For one, I like to see what's going on so I know what's going on, right? kind of crazy about that. So I'm going to do a find all on my repo, and I'll do a for each, and I'll just print those out so we can make sure we actually have values. I really don't like the whole, I think it's there. I'm a firm believer in proof. So we're going to also, before we get started, I'm going to just delete all because we're going to be restarting this. And I mean, we're dealing with an in-memory database, but if we're not, it's just a good habit to get into when you're playing with sample data to just make sure you have a clean slate with each restart. So I do a little cleanup. I add the sample data, and I just print it out so we can make sure that we've got everything working as we expect it to. Coffee. Nice dark roast there. All right, so look at that. So we have our sample data is coming through loud and clear. And we can see that we took our type and we derived our code from that. So now we have everything at least apparently up and running. Let's go ahead and test our API. So let's see. Oops, that's the wrong way to go. So let's see. Let's maximize that. All right, so I'm going to use HTTP because I like HTTP. It allows you to shortcut things, like it assumes localhost if you don't specify a host name. So it's nice and clean. It gives you a great looking output. So instead of curling, you get something that's a little more palatable. So we're talking coffee in the palate. All right, so the coffee's API works. Now let's go ahead and try our ID, right? So I'm going to grab the Klatch Dark Roast here, and we'll see what that does. And that works. So now I'm just going to do a search, code equals. So let's see, espresso roast. Oh, typing. And let's see, let's quote that because thanks Z shell. That works. Now what happens if we do a search and we don't include anything? And that works. So that's our first one. That's our default. Everything works as expected, because that always happens in live demos. But anyway. Okay, so we have a working Java application now, right? So we've got our coffee, our domain class. We have our controller, which gets us our API. We have our repository, which creates our database or provides our database interactions. And then, of course, our main application class, which we also embedded a little sample code generator in there. So let's start off this journey to Kotlin, or journey back to Kotlin. So I've got my Java application, and I want to start integrating some Kotlin into that. What's the easiest, best, most bang for the buck type of approach, starting point? I like to start with domain classes because they give you so much for so little effort. Now I'm going to do this one very meticulously by hand, just so I can kind of show a few things and compare the Java and Kotlin, but I'll show you ways to kind of accelerate that as well as we go. But for now, this is all by hand. So once again, this is a Kotlin file. I'm going to just change this from a this is a Java file. I'm going to change this from a coffee.java to a coffee.kt. And we immediately see that IntelliJ says, yep, this is a Kotlin class. Except, it's all over here saying something looks really, really wrong here. So we're going to drag that down to our Kotlin package here, or directory here. And now we can get to work on this. And I'm doing this manually just to show you, but you typically wouldn't go through quite the same steps. But we see here that public is grayed out. And that's because in Kotlin, classes are public by default. So this is superfluous. You don't need that public keyword there anymore. And then I want to point out that in Java, you have member variables and you have getters and setters, or if you prefer, accessors and mutators. And that's fine. It's a construct that works. But with Kotlin, you have properties that you can expose. By default, they're public, but you can also change visibility and change how they're exposed with getters and setters. But by default, it kind of is the same as Spring in terms of having opinions, right? By default, it provides a lot of capability just in a very easily accessible way. So I've got my member variables here. And what I'm going to do first off is just, I'm going to move this from there, right? So I've got, now this is where my class starts. This is all in the header still. And what I'm going to do is define my primary constructor in my class header, which Kotlin does allow you to do, which is very, very handy. I'm going to just bring these in here, and then let's get to work on those. So I'm going to bring this up. Now, in Kotlin, in Java, I should say, let me go back to that, and we'll ignore some of those other warnings. In Java, you have the visibility, whether it's final or not, but you have the type. I guess I'm kind of getting turned around because there's about half a dozen things I want to talk about, and I don't want to miss them. But let's approach this one at a time. So we have the type and the variable name. So in Kotlin, that's kind of turned on its head. So I do this ID, get rid of the semicolon, and it's of type string. And of course, it's separated by a colon. And of course, here, this is, as it stands now with ID and string, this is a parameter in the constructor. But if I want to make this a property as well within and available within this class, I can make this a val or a var. A var, of course, is mutable. You can assign it more than once. A val isn't. You can assign it once, 0 or 1 time. So it's like a Java final, right? The annotation still works. So this is an ID of type string, and it is exposed as a property within our class. Now, I do want to provide a value here, and because I want, well, I guess I should back up again here. I keep getting ahead of myself. So this is a string. So as it stands right now, this ID can only be a string. It has to have a value of some kind, a string value of some kind. Now, if we want to allow null values, and in this case for a constructor we do because we know that Mongo is going to be providing our ID value. So we want to be able to not have to provide a string value to our constructor and yet still have it assigned once and only once, right? So I want to be able to make this or provide no value to this at all when I create a coffee, because Mongo will provide and assign that value for me. So I want to provide it with, or allow for a null value. However, this will bark at me, and I guess because I've just got other things down below, it's just not going to yell at me. But this is a string. It requires a string. If you want to make this nullable, you have to make it a string. And that allows you to, it says, look, I can't be sure it's a string or not. It may not have a string value in there. So it is the question mark, right? So I'm going to add that question mark here so we can assign or provide no value to it as in the constructor. And then I want to, as well, and I'm going to take this code out because we're going to get to the code momentarily. And of course, same thing, val type, and this also is a string type. And we want to provide the default value here of, we'll just say any old Joe. So if we don't provide a type of coffee, we'll just call it any old Joe. And of course, we want to be able to not provide a value for the ID because Mongo will provide that for us. We'll get to the type again momentarily. Now, we don't need the constructors here. In Kotlin, you can have multiple constructors. In most cases, you don't need them because you can provide, again, different parameters. You have named parameters. So you can provide, only some parameters. You have default values, or I guess I should say the default values. So you can provide only some constructor values. So you have a lot of flexibility in a single constructor construct, if you will. I also should say that this is such a common pattern that you don't even need to have that constructor keyword there. So that makes it pretty concise. Now, coming back to the code momentarily, let's go ahead and get into some of these things. Again, these are properties, the ID and the type. So we don't really need these getters here, right? We're taking care of the setters as well because we're assigning what's coming in or the default value, so we can get rid of these. And of course, that leaves us with our equals hashcode and toString. Kotlin has a concept called a data class, and that gives you, by default, equals hashcode toString, component in, copy functions, so we can get rid of all of these. But I hear you saying, what if I want to provide my own implementation? So can you override those? Can you provide your own implementation of, let's say, toString? And of course, you can. So I'm going to show you how to do that, as well as gives me a chance to show off another capability that Kotlin gives you. I'm going to change this from a method here to a Kotlin function. And this is why the saying came into being that everything is fun in Kotlin, because this is the keyword, fun. Okay, so this is our fun for toString. And I'm going to, we can say that this returns a type of string, right? Let's see, so, yeah. Oh yes, I need to override. That's my, I was going to say, why is it barking at me? Because I need to indicate this is overriding the provided toString that the data class provides for you. So we're so used to seeing this kind of monstrosity in Java that we often don't even give it another thought, but there is a better way, and Kotlin does kind of approach this very well, I think. So I'm going to bring in and create a string template here. So I'm going to do this. So ID equals ID, type equals $type. So we have our variable here, and code. I haven't done anything with code yet, so it's still going to give me a little red warning there. And then, of course, we can get rid of that. And there we go. So we've done most of the things, except we haven't done anything with code yet. Code is derived, right? So let's do something with that. There are many ways you can do this. I'm going to show you an unorthodox way right now, again, because it allows me to show you another feature of Kotlin. This is not what you would typically do. I'm trying to come up with an idea of why you would ever do this, and I can't. And I'm going to remove that semicolon while I think of it. But semicolon, semicolon, and we can clean that up. But you can. So with Kotlin, again, classes are closed by default. So for instance, a string class, if you want to do a string, let's see, we'll create a function called string dot double length equals. And what that allows you to do is create an extension function or extend a closed class. So if we say this, that's the current instance of a string you're dealing with, and you take the length and you do ×2 or whatever the case may be. Well, we can do the same thing here with our code. So we have our coffee.code equals, and we'll take this, getting ahead of myself again. So this dot, and we take our type, and we do a, let's see, we'll do a 2 lowercase as we did before, and replace. We'll take our spaces out and replace them with a dash, and that's it. Now, that's an extension function, and you typically do that when you have a closed class you can't have access to, you don't have access to. We don't have that case here. We actually have a class we can modify. Oh, I should also mention that you can create a val, right? And you can just say, this is my get, right? Oh, yes. Okay, so that's happier. Yeah, so you can do this. And that will actually provide a getter for a value called code. Now, I'll show you another way. You can, of course, do a var and then just do the direct assignment here. And everything's happy as well. Var coffee code. For some reason, it's not happy. Yeah, well, come back to that in a bit. What I do want to do, though, is pop this up here, because this is the way you would typically do this, right? So, yeah. So that works. And, of course, you can do the val with the getter as well, but I actually have some other things in mind that will require me to make this a var. Now, I do want to point out at this point that if you didn't have to override or didn't want to override anything, if you didn't have a derived value, I mean, this could be your entire domain class. So you went from a couple pages of Java domain class to one line, which is pretty powerful, right? And by the way, that works. So if we want to run this now with our application, the one thing that we do need to change is, of course, the constructors, because now with this constructor, we expect our first value to be a null. And we can reorder this and kind of get around that as well, but I'm not going to, again, keeping things pretty simple today. But what this will do, we just need to tweak this just a bit. So we have our type, and we do a new coffee, and again, null value here, and then our type. So we've fixed our constructor. Everything is still Java except for our domain class, and yet everything will run, or should run. We'll find out. Look at that. Everything is in there. Now, just to go ahead and I'll do a quick test. I actually am kind of pushing up against the time that I have allotted, so I don't want to run too long with this, but I do want to show that, yes, everything works. And this is particularly powerful if you're looking for a way to incorporate Kotlin into your Java applications, just to kind of test the waters. I recommend you start with a domain class or a couple domain classes, as long as you have your build file set up to where it will incorporate both the Kotlin compiler and the Java compiler, which is I recommend if you have an existing Java application, a Java Spring Boot application, you just go to the initializer and add in the same dependencies and generate that file, right? And that way you can get, you see these that you say, oh, look, Jackson module, Kotlin, Kotlin Reflect, Kotlin Standard Life, copy paste those over. And it allows you to make sure you don't typo as you come in with things, and you're up and running immediately. You convert one or more of your domain classes, you test it, you see that everything works, nothing breaks, nothing blows up, and you can continue rolling along. And it gives you that incremental refactoring that you really need, and when you've got a very important application running. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a few different shortcuts you can do and to ways to clean things up, and then we'll wrap things up. This won't take too long, so if you'll bear with me. Now, I'm going to go to the repository here next, and I want to show you something else. If you go on IntelliJ down to to code, I went too far over. If you see this option, that looks pretty handy, right? And the good news is it pretty much works. I mean, there are a couple little stylistic things and stuff that you may want to quibble with. I do, but generally speaking, it works pretty well. So I just converted my coffee repository. Everything looks good there in code. I mean, it's hard to get much better than that. I don't want these to be nullable. I do want these to indicate that, yes, indeed, these are all there. I will be returning a coffee here, and I'll show you here how that works as well. Actually, I do want to keep the return possibly a coffee an optional, and this is optional, right? It could be a coffee or not. So that's a little bit cleaner. Not a lot of change, but nice. And we see here that this is now a Kotlin interface. I'm going to drag that down to our Kotlin directory structure. And then just in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and roll forward here. And of course, here we see that we're returning. I'm not going to get too worked up about this because I'm going to change this over. So I'm not going to change this to an optional just yet. But yeah, we'll go forward. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Convert Java file to Kotlin. Oh, and I should say that the little warning that I clicked through rather quickly before, I didn't think to show you. Some code in the rest of your project may require corrections after performing this conversion. Do you want to find such code and correct it too? Absolutely. Do as much for us as you can. That's great. All right, so I'm going to drag this down. And now let's see what we can do to clean that up. Now I'm going to skip over this because this is a little, I'm not a big fan of this. And I really just realized that this font may not be necessarily that great. So I've got let's blow this up just a bit. Let's expand the size. We'll take this up. I've got high contrast. I remember to do that to make it where it was a little more readable, but I forgot to make it larger. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to skip over this monstrosity because, again, this works, but it's not the cleanest. And I do want to show you a few different things here, and then we'll harmonize the API a bit. So with our get mapping of ID, that all looks good. We've converted this to a fun. And we've got our variable name and the variable type separated by colon. It's returning an optional of coffee. Well, you know what? We've got our braces here, and we've got return. But in Kotlin, if you have a single expression that forms the entirety of your method, you can just do a direct assignment. So we'll do this. We also don't have to even specify our return type because if this can be determined, as you can see it is here, it handles it for you. So that's pretty nice, right? We don't need to write nearly as much code to get exactly the same response, exactly the same outcome. For our search for coffee, we see here that pardon me, request param we indicated was required equals false. Well, we already know that it's not necessarily there because we have this nullable now, right? So this is a string, so we don't even need this part, which shortens that up a little bit. I'm also going to, again, get rid of the type. And then again, I'm going to make this a direct assignment because while in Java, the if statement, if else is a statement, it is not. It's an expression in Kotlin. So I'm going to, actually, I'll just do that. So if, and then we actually do want to do this, get rid of that, and there we go. So, and as you can see, it returns potentially a coffee. We might not find one, and that's because we indicated here in the repository that, if we can't find a coffee by the code, there may not be one there. That's fine. That's exactly what we want. And we can make this a bit more idiomatic. Instead of pulling an iterator and doing a next, we'll just do a first, which is provided for as a convenience method in Kotlin. So I also don't need to do a null check this way, because what I can do, again, more idiomatic in Kotlin, is check to see if it's a null or empty value. So if it's an empty string, or if there's no string there, if it's a null string, so to speak, then we can just check that. And of course, Kotlin, just like Java, means that you don't have to, if you have a single statement, have these, which that's not unique to Kotlin, but it gets pretty clean here, right? So let's see. Why is this? Oh, yes, because it's a direct assignment, so we don't need that. Yes. Now, coming back up to here, this does work. We've got a val. We've defined a get. I just prefer to keep everything very consistent. Make this a fun as well. And, of course, look at that. Everything is so clean. All right, so the only thing left to do, really, is to convert our main application class. So we'll do that. We'll do a convert Java to Kotlin. Yes, by all means, find and correct anything that you need to. We see here that, yes, it's a Kotlin class, but it's a little, I don't know, it's a little ugly. We can do better. So let's refactor. This doesn't take care of everything for you, but it gets you well on your way. So, all right. Now, when you're dealing with the JVM and with the underlying Java, I guess engine is a better way, the best way I can think of it off the top of my head to put it. But of course, when you're dealing with, you have Kotlin, what you do is create a JVM static method. This was a public static void method in Java, right? Kotlin, I mean, it works. This is perfectly acceptable to do it that way, but you don't have to do it that way in Kotlin. And let me show you why. Because Kotlin has top-level methods. So I can get rid of this, or top-level functions, I should say. Old habits die hard. And then make this a top-level function. And everything works just fine. However, we can make this also a bit more idiomatic, because we can make this a run application. And we will pass our Kotlin class here, or make it a application of type keycap application, and we'll pass our args. Everything will be fine there. We need to then do some massaging of our command line runner. Ooh, talking is hard. I'm not even sure I'm still in English, but okay. So we'll assume that it's there, and we'll clean that up just a bit. I'm going to do a delete all, and we'll keep our find all, but we do need to, or we can clean this up a little bit. Let's make this a list of, right? And we don't need to convert this to a stream because that's automatic. Kotlin handles that for us automatically. And then to map this, right? So Kotlin, we have our variable and our type. We can just get rid of this, right? Because we can do type inference, and as you can see, it's a string. And of course, we don't need our null, because what I can do with Kotlin's named parameters here. So there we go. And so we've got type. We know it's a string coming in. We're assigning that lambda parameter to the type field in the constructor for coffee. But we can go one better, because in Kotlin we can let's change this to it, because Kotlin's default lambda parameter, when it has a single parameter, is it. But of course, since that's the default, we can just get rid of that entirely and just do that, right? Now, I do want to say that when you have a map, or for each, or for each down below as well, if you have multiple parameters, I mean, you can put this in parens, and it works just the same way. But if your last parameter is a lambda, in fact, hopefully this will show up. Come on. No, it's not gonna give me the hint now. But if your last parameter to a function is a lambda, you can move that lambda outside of the parameters, right? Or outside of the parens, I should say. But of course, we don't need to even have those. So let's see. Why is that? Oh, there, it's happy. Okay. So same thing with the for each. What I can do is, this is just it, right? So we'll just do a repos.save it. So that's nice. And we don't need to specify the type of lambda. We can get rid of that. Change this to it. And we'll just get rid of all this cruft. Boy, that just looks so nice, doesn't it? Okay. So let's run this and see if I've missed anything. Everything starts right up. Everything looks good. We have our coffees. Oh, thank goodness, save the coffees. Let's go ahead and try this out. Try out the API. So let's do our coffees. I'm going to grab a particular coffee. Let's do the Caldi Coffee 700. Well, let's do a different one because that's our first one. Let's do the SK Coffee. That's also a good one. They're all good. Now, let's face it. Okay, so we have this. Let's do a search with no parameters, and that gets us our Caldi Coffee 700. That's our house coffee, house coffee. So that's what we want to promote. But if we do want to say, hey, search for code, let's see what some of the other ones are. So let's do our Klatch Dark Roast, right? So let's do that. And let me close that so Z shell doesn't bark at me. And there we have it. So everything works, right? And it was so easy to write a Kotlin application, to migrate a Java application to Kotlin. It's just so nice, clean, elegant. It allows you to go to, this is our, of course, again, this is just our main function. But this is just some sample data. And then we have our domain class, which again is this. That's really long. We could even make it shorter if we didn't need the extra stuff there. I mean, it could be that, literally that. And then, of course, we have our repository, which is effectively the same, just a little bit cleaner than the Java version, but basically the same. The controller is nice and neat and tidy and short. It's just so much less code to maintain. And again, the code is effectively the same from the compiler's perspective, right? It compiles into the same JVM bytecode, but it's very, very different for us. And as the developers, we're the ones who pore over it day in, day out, who maintain it, who have to either sift through pages of code or a few lines of code to maintain, to troubleshoot, to diagnose and resolve when things go wrong. So it is rather helpful, right? It's elegant. Okay, to go back to here and wrap up, and then we'll just, we'll call it a day. So some helpful resources, again, the Spring pages, the Kotlin language pages, kotlin.link. I think that's actually just for like Kotlin conferences and other resources, but the kotlinlang.org is the primary site for your Kotlin, the official Kotlin docs and resources and the JetBrains resources they provide, for all of us to use. And then, of course, if you want to check out the code for today and more, it's under KCup service in my GitHub repo. So check it out, star it, watch it. And hopefully we'll talk more about Kotlin in the future. Again, this has kind of been a gentle introduction, but next time let's get in and really see what we can tweak and see how far we can take this. So thanks for coming, and I'll let you get back to your Wednesday. So happy 2021, everyone. And let's see what we can do with this year. Let's make it a good one. Bye.